I had a really unusual week. It was a week of extremes. Woke up at the beginning of the week in Costa Rica. I was there on a short-term mission trip and got to experience, at least from a distance, some of the incredible wonders of that place. Beautiful country, majestic mountains, could see some rainforests at a distance, heard some, what I imagine in my mind to be some exotic birds singing in the morning outside my window. It was surreal in lots of ways and got to experience the beautiful hospitality of the people. Yesterday, I woke up in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It was different than Costa Rica. Got to experience a lot of, there's mountains there too. Didn't get to go into those. We were there for my son's robotics tournament at the convention center in Sevierville. So did get to see some massive water slide parks. Got to see a place that did helicopter rides to look at Christmas lights. Got to see billboards advertising the Hatfields versus McCoy's dinner theater show. And lots of places that sold fudge and moonshine. So a very kind of different kinds of places to visit. And it got me thinking about an article that I read about recently, which talked about the difference between being noticed and being seen. And it talked about how there's so much of our culture right now is based around a noticing rather than a seeing. And I guess that was highlighted to me yesterday waking up in East Tennessee. Now, nothing against that area. It is what it is. It's its own thing. But it's very much a notice kind of environment, right? Like the billboards that change over with the little flaps that move, and then it advertises the next thing, and it advertises the next thing, and the helicopters whirling overhead, and all of these things that are calling out for your attention that really distract you, honestly, from some of the natural beauty of the place. You're driving in so much traffic and seeing so many advertisements and being sort of bombarded with sensory overload that you forget some of the natural beauty of that place. And it's kind of like what we experience a lot of in our world today. We experience the people that are out to be noticed. And so the things that grab our attention first and foremost are beautiful people, or people who are saying controversial things, or whoever is sort of shouting the loudest. And it just feels like a constant competition for competing for our attention. Where will our interest, our energy, our focus be drawn to? And what sometimes ends up happening, I think what happens a lot of the time, is that we are drawn away from seeing because we're so wrapped up in the noticing, if you can appreciate that distinction. And this was on full display for me the past week or so when I was in Costa Rica. Now, many of you didn't know that I was planning to do this trip. This wasn't a Costa Rica mission trip that was offered to the whole church. This came about in a rather unusual kind of way for me where I have been taking a greater interest in prison ministry and jail ministry over the past couple of years, and kind of been pulled into that in some ways that were unexpected, and was offered an invitation as I was talking to someone at a Sister United Methodist Church about this, and she said, well, hey, I am taking a mission team, a small team, maybe just 4 or 5 of us, that is going to go to Costa Rica and look at some innovative stuff that's being done as far as mission work in the prison system. And so I felt like God was nudging me to do this. And so it wasn't the best time of year, and it wasn't very well planned out as far as thinking about it a long time in advance like you would typically do when you're going to leave the country. And so with about a month's notice, I ended up signing up for this trip and went away for a week. And what I learned about down there was this different way that there is prison ministry happening, and I got to see some of the things that were on display that I think further clarified this distinction between noticing and seeing. The first stop that I won't talk about much today, but was a fascinating part of the experience, was to visit a special experiment that's been going on for about 20 years, where they take a select number of the inmates that have been handpicked to be a part of a Christian ministry program. And the idea there is that these men, and it's a group of men, about 80 of them, that meet in a sort of a prison within a larger prison system, and they have a lot more freedom and a lot more opportunities to improve themselves and to be in community with one another because they're separated from the general population, but there are a lot of requirements that are put on them for that. But they end up kind of policing themselves. In fact, for 80 men, there is one woman who is the official guard from the prison system that is watching over them, because they do such a good job of watching over each other and making sure that order is kept, and then they're improving their lives and preparing for their eventual release and re-entering of society. And I'm very curious about that and eager to learn how we might be able to think about doing something like that here at home. But the other experiences that I had were the ones that really made me think about the things that we don't see very much of. On the afternoon of the first day that we were there, the second prison we visited was an urban prison. It was just on the outskirts of downtown San Jose, and you could probably drive past this place 1,000 times without realizing it, but it is the outside, is the facade of what becomes a much more elaborate, larger prison behind the walls of the storefront that it looks like. We went inside to St. Sebastian's prison, and after going through security and the metal detector and the pat-down and so forth, we had to show them our passports, we had to provide a proof of insurance, and then we were cleared to walk into the next checkpoint. We walked through a labyrinth of hallways, down some stairs, around the corner, through some more hallways, and got to a second checkpoint where we came through a set of steel prison bars, exactly like what you'd expect them to look like. We went beyond those and we waited for clearance to move into the next place where we would enter into one of the cell blocks. And we got in there, and as we walked down the hallway, we were going downhill until we finally were closed in now. We're 3 layers of cell doors behind the exterior to the street outside. And now we are underground. And we were locked in a room. There were about 10 of us with 73 inmates, all between the ages of 18 and 35. And they were there for worship. They were there for any number of crimes. Some of them had committed murder. Most of them were in there for drug-related offenses. But they were locked underground in a room with no natural light, one single flickering tube light overhead. They had done laundry and were hanging their clothes from clotheslines overhead. And in this dim, bleak room with wet walls, in this dungeon of a place, there, our leader, named Carlos, lifted up his hands and started to sing. And the voices joined in, and other voices joined in, and they were singing this chorus of a song that was unfamiliar to me, but all the men seemed to know it by heart. And as one song moved into the next song and into the next song, some of them fell to their knees. Some of them began to weep quietly. Others lift up their arms and their hands in praise. And then we were told it was time to pray over their leader, because Carlos had identified one young man as a leader among his peers, and he knelt down, actually curled up into a ball on the floor, and we placed our hands on him and we prayed for him for about 15 minutes. And then Carlos told us that it was time to open it up for anybody that wanted prayer. And so those of us who were a part of this team that had visited from the States, and a group of others who were volunteers that came in to do prison ministry, we met one by one with these 73 men. And they told us their prayer requests, and through an interpreter, they talked about things like back pain, or they talked about things like not having enough to eat, or they talked about things like my daughter who is outside the walls that I don't have contact with and that I don't know how she is faring in my absence. We prayed about all of these things, and then Carlos pulled me aside. He said, "I want to introduce you to somebody." He brought me over to 2 young men. The first thing that stood out to me is I thought, they can't be 18. They look like my 15-year-old son's peers. They looked so young to me to be in this place and sentenced for an amount of time I didn't understand. The first one I was told was named Luis. Luis is about this tall. He said, through Carlos, I'm a Christian. I've offered my life to Christ. But this is my friend, Jay Marone. And Jay Marone has questions. Carlos said, Tyler, you're up. I want you to talk to Jay Marone. Now listen, this is part of the job that comes with being a pastor from time to time. And yet I don't have that many experiences where the stakes felt as high or the intensity was as palpable as it was in that moment. I found out that Jay Marone had been locked in this prison 1 week earlier. He was brand new. By the look in his eyes, he was terrified. They were separated that day, these 72 or 3 men, from the rest of the population because these were the ones who said, we want to meet for Christian worship, and Jay Marone came there as a seeker. I stood there with Jay Marone, and he looked terrified, and I said, I understand you want to learn about Jesus. See. I placed one hand on his shoulder, and I clutched his other hands in my right hand. And I held him, and not really preparing something for this moment, I said to him the words that I shared with you a couple of years ago on Easter Sunday, where I said, one of the best things that I have ever heard said about the Christian experience and about Jesus' love are the words from Frederick Buechner, who says, and you may remember this, because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, it means that the worst thing is never the last thing. The worst thing is never the last thing. And I put my hand on his heart. I don't know why. I just felt led to do that. And I said, I don't care what the world sees. Jesus sees what you are capable of. Jesus knows that you are more than the mistake that you have made. And Jesus reminds you that the worst thing that you have ever done is not the last thing that he will remember. It is not the only thing he sees. Jesus sees you in a way that the world does not. And there is hope in that. And as I was praying for him, I felt my hand getting wet as tears fell from his eyes onto my hand. I'm not saying this other than to say, these are moments that are Spirit-led. I feel totally ill-equipped to deal with that situation. But that was about as raw and real as some of my face-to-face ministry with the stranger has ever been. And I felt desperation in that moment from him, from me, from everybody in the room. And everybody was watching and paying attention. And I hope that I said something through the Holy Spirit that will make an impact on him. There's 2 stories that Andrew read from Mark's gospel. The second one was about the man who was brought by his friends, and they were lowered into the room where Peter's mother's house was. You remember the crowd is pushing in, they can't access Jesus, so they lower him down on a mat and they bring him to Jesus. And so I'm reminded of that as Luis brought his friend Jay Marone to the pastors and said he wants to know more about Jesus. And I'm praying that something powerful touched his heart that day. The other part of that story, and the part that I actually want to highlight, is that Jesus looks at the man and he says, my child, my son, your faith has made you well. You are healed. He sees him. He sees him not as a paralyzed man, not as a charitable case, not as somebody who clawed their way to the front of the line with the help of their friends to get Jesus' attention. But he sees him, and we know this because he calls him my child. This man wasn't out to be noticed. He was out to get seen. And perhaps for the first time, a total stranger saw him not as the world saw him, not as the way people noticed him, but he truly felt seen. After we had done the experience in the jails, a day and a half later, we made our way to the second part of the trip. This time we interacted with Carlos's wife. Her name is Carla, which is super easy to remember. And Carla has, when she married Carlos, she quickly became a part of his prison ministry. And so one of the specialties that she does as part of her ministry is she does something called Kairos ministry. Some of you may be familiar with that. There is a program in the United Methodist Church called Walk to Emmaus. Many of you have maybe even done that, but the idea is that you separate yourself from normal day-to-day living and you go on a weekend retreat. You probably go without your phone, you may go without a watch on, and you don't even know a lot about what you're going to be doing, but during that time, you will hear the stories and the testimonials from others who share about their experience and their walk with Christ, and it's a fully immersive retreat experience. It's actually the thing that our youth group's Discovery Weekend is modeled after. Well, there's a prison version of this called Kairos. And there's a spin-off of that called Kairos Outside. And so Kairos is Walk to Emmaus, but it's done for prisoners in the prison. Kairos Outside is for those who are outside the prison walls, and usually the family members of those who are locked up. So they know that the circumstances around living a life where you have a loved one locked up are different than most people can understand. That is not a common experience to share with people. And so for you to go through that experience of a deeply personal Christian retreat, a weekend retreat, is something that you can do with your sisters that is different than if you would be a part of any other group of women. And so this group of women met for Kairos Afuera, which is Kairos Outside, and they met outside the prison walls. And most of these women had a son or a husband or a brother who was locked up, and a few of them were formerly incarcerated women themselves who didn't get to go through Kairos when they were behind bars. So this experience is led by women who have been through the program or others who feel led to be a part of it. And for those of us who are the men, there were about 5 of us, and our job was entirely around hospitality. We set the tables, we cooked the food, we cleaned up after the meal, and we prepared for the next one. And when you've got 90 women, you start breakfast at 4 a.m., and you don't finish until 12 at night. And so we worked long days providing these meals. I was told before I came that I would need to pack a Hawaiian shirt, a Western shirt, a suit, and then something else. Then they said, oh, and do you have any traditional Costa Rican wear? I said, no. I don't own a Western shirt either, so I had to buy one of those. But anyway, I was very confused as to why we were doing a prison ministry thing and I was supposed to come with a suitcase of costumes. And what I learned is that when we would prepare the meal and then serve it, the meals were a moment of levity in an otherwise heavy weekend experience. And so the first meal was a Hawaiian theme, and all the women came in and were given leis, and they sat down and we played Polynesian music, and it was just a lighthearted atmosphere. Another one was a birthday party theme that touched a lot of these women because in most cases, nobody has remembered or celebrated their birthday in the whole time that their loved one has been locked up. You'd be shocked to see the impact that celebrating somebody's birthday when it's nowhere near their birthday on the calendar. actually has on someone who has felt unseen and unrecognized for a very long time. But the most meaningful moment for me and for many people came as something of a surprise. It was last Saturday night, and it was the night that I was supposed to wear a suit. A suit. So I put on a suit, and they told me that this is how it was going to work. I had a line to memorize in Spanish. And I'm just going to say, let's say that I'm presenting Maria. I would say, buenas tardes, good evening. Le presento Maria, la hija del rey, which means, good evening. I present to you Maria, the daughter of the king. Daughter of the king. I'm just being real with you, and I thought, this sounds really hokey. And what happened was they made an arch of flowers, like an arbor, over the door. And then one at a time, the women who were attending this event came in. They were given a rose. One of the women put a tiara on their head. They walked under the arbor. I extended my arm, and I said to the group of all of the women leading the event against the back wall, I said, buenas tardes. Le presento Maria, la hija del rey. And they all cheered wildly. And I am not kidding you when I say almost every one of those women wept. Wept. We escorted them to their seats, pulled back their chair, they sat down, we scooted them in, and they could barely eat their meal. They were crying so hard. Now, the analog to this, just imagine being something in their situation. Their life is very hard. They don't know about the well-being or the health and the safety of their loved one who's locked up. In many cases, they are caring for young children at home. Now they are the sole breadwinner, not to mention the fact that in Costa Rica, they do not feed prisoners in the prisons. It is the family's responsibility outside the walls to bring all of the meals on Wednesday, a week's worth of food for your locked up loved one. So now every Tuesday night you stay up all night preparing a week's worth of food for your loved one, which you then have to stand in a line against a wall for most of the day on Wednesday that you took off work and found childcare, or you dragged your children to the prison with you. You sat out in the hot sun under an umbrella, waiting against a wall with a week's worth of food. Then the guards chopped it up into fine pieces, making sure that you were smuggling nothing into your loved one. Then they get their food and you go home and you go back to work on Thursday morning. And you do it all over again. And then suddenly you get invited to a weekend's retreat where you don't know anybody there, but you quickly realize that everybody understands you for the first time because they understand what your life is like, and you don't have to explain yourself to them. And then you get to learn about Jesus, and you understand these things that you understand conceptually, but you don't have enough time to think about because your life is living one moment to the next. And then all of a sudden, somebody presents to you a beautiful meal that they've taken time to prepare, and there's a candlelit dinner, and you are welcomed into the room, and you are put a tiara is given to your head, and you are given a red rose to hold in your arms, and you are told that you are a child of God, and a banquet has been thrown in your honor. And now I get it. Now I get it. Nobody has seen these women for a very long time. And at the moment that they feel seen for the first time in who knows how many years, they break down and weep. They release emotions that they have been holding on to, trying to be as brave as possible for so long. And something that looked corny to me on the surface ended up being the most impactful part of the whole trip. The hemorrhaging woman was desperate to feel better. She risks it all to cut through the crowd and just to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. She believes and has so much faith that he understands her enough that if she just touches his clothing, that will be enough to heal her. And in fact, it does. But when Jesus finally recognizes who did it and she fesses up and comes forward, he says to her, "My daughter, mi hija, your faith has made you well. You are a daughter of the King. You are a child of God." She feels seen in a way that she has never felt seen before. Countless times she'd been noticed, the woman with the bleeding problem. This time she's seen, not as the woman with the illness, but as the daughter of the King. We have our work cut out for us, church. We have a long way to go because we need to learn how to figure out how to put on the lenses of seeing instead of just the observations of noticing. We got to cut through all the superficiality and look to see the real person. We got to understand the people behind the people. We got to understand the circumstances behind the struggle. People who suffer often suffer in silence. People who suffer often suffer in secrecy. And one of the things that we are called to do, if we are to emulate Christ in the way that we live our lives and in the ministries that we do, we are called to see through the distractions and see through the superficiality, to not be noticers, but to be seers. It's going to take work on our part. It's going to take training. It takes practice. But I think we'll be able to do it. I think we can look for ways to be the light piercing through the darkness. I think we can look for ways to lift up our neighbors. I think we can look for opportunities to remind somebody that they are a precious child of God. And I think we need to continue to remind each other and the world around us that because of the resurrection, the worst thing, the present circumstances, the suffering you currently face will not be the last thing. Therefore, we have the superpower of hope. We have the ability to share good news. We can have the vision of Jesus Christ, which will mean that we can be bearers of good news for a hurting world around us. Let us pray.